virtually. Once you start speaking, there's a slight delay before you're displayed on the main screen. Speak into the microphone because it will activate the camera, displaying the speaker on the main screen. Do not stop your remarks if you're not immediately seeing the screen switch. If the screen does not change after several seconds, please make sure you are not muted. To minimize background noise and ensure correct speaker is being heard and displayed, we ask that you remain on mute unless you have sought recognition, and I will call on you, or if you need to seek recognition, please do so. Myself or a staff designee may mute the participant's microphone when they're not under recognition if there's inadvertent background noise. Members who are virtual, though, I want to remind you that you are responsible for muting and unmuting yourselves unless we have a technical issue. If I notice when you're recognized and having a technical issue and you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask the staff to send you a request to unmute yourself. Please accept the request so that you are no longer muted. And finally, House rules would require me to remind you that we have set up an email address in which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing to any of our hearings. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. This morning's subcommittee will receive testimony from the Honorable Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, General Mark Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and to help answer any extremely technical questions, we are joined today by Undersecretary Mike McCord, Comptroller. Gentlemen, thank you for participating, and I welcome you to our subcommittee. The Biden administration released its fiscal year 2023 budget request in March. As always, this subcommittee will have an aggressive schedule to review the request, to make adjustments, and pass the bill out of committee in June. Our goal will be to go to the floor with the appropriations bill in July and to get them to the President's desk by October for his signature. We both know that speed is of the essence because both here at home and around the world, democracy and democratic values are under threat. Congress must make every effort to pass these appropriations bills on time. For fiscal year 2023, the President has proposed $762 billion within our subcommittee's jurisdiction. This is a $33 billion or 4.6% increase over what was enacted in fiscal year 2022. Make no mistake, we will ensure that the Department of Defense has the resources it needs to protect our country. But this top line number, when you put in perspective, let's think about it for a minute. In 2015, when we were still fighting in Afghanistan, the department received $5.60 billion. That's an increase of spending over $200 billion in just 8 years. And yes, the world has changed, and has changed rapidly in recent years. And we've learned a lot. We've learned from the war in Ukraine that it's not only important that we have strong military deterrence, but we also must have a robust diplomatic efforts to rally the world in opposition to authoritarianism. We must both ensure that we have both in order to protect our national security. It is our responsibility as Congress to strike the correct balance between defense, diplomacy, and development. The war in Ukraine has also made it clear that the foundational task of properly maintaining, training, and equipping a modern military is essential to our success in the 21st century conflicts. The poor performance in Russia and their military has highlighted this very fact. Taking care of our personnel, their families, providing our service members with the best training possible, ensuring logistics challenges can be overcome, and given decision makers the best intelligence. These are all vital components of making sure that our military can win in any conflict. Procurement, modernization, of course, are important, but we will always want to have the edge over our enemy. It doesn't matter if we have 355 Navy ships with the most advanced weapons if we cannot perform basic maintenance and keep the ships in service. Investments in personnel and operation and maintenance and health don't always drive the defense budget debates, but last year they made up 63% of our bill. We all know that there's no more critical investment in the life and health and safety of our service members. Members have been particularly alarmed with recent events at the USS George Washington, where there have been several deaths, including investigations into suicide. The Navy has launched its investigation into what led to these terrible tragedies. This subcommittee stands ready to work with you for any additional funding for mental health services and any suicide prevention programs that you should want more resources for. We look forward to hearing from our witnesses how the budget request prioritizes investments in our people, which are the backbone of our force. I want to commend the department for proposing a $3.1 billion in this budget for increasing resiliency at installations, for energy efficiency, for its research and development into clean energy. As the largest consumer of fuel in the federal government, the department needs to do more to reduce its emissions, lower the cost of energy, and to fight climate change. And our subcommittee wants to work with you on these shared goals. And we all know that climate change and addressing it is part of our national security agenda. Finally, several of us have had the opportunity to travel to Eastern Europe in the last month to see firsthand the importance of working with the soldiers and sailors and Marines, airmen and guards who are all doing whatever they can to help Ukraine defend itself and promote security throughout the region. We look forward to hearing how this budget request and the immediate threat of Russian aggression in Europe while making investments in future capabilities in the Indo-Pacific region. And as you know, we sent over to the Senate the supplemental support for Ukraine last night. So Secretary Austin, General Milley, Undersecretary McCord, I want to thank you again for your service and the service of your families to our country and for being here ready to answer any questions we might have. But before we hear your testimony, sir, I'd like to recognize our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Calvert, for any opening comments he would have. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair McCollum. I want to thank Secretary Austin, General Milley, for being here today to testify the Department of Defense budget request for fiscal year 2023. Though I look forward to hearing about your priorities for the coming fiscal year, I must note my disappointment in the request, both in the amount and substance. As I said last year, I believe it's critical that we fund the DoD at 3 to 5% above inflation to meet our national defense requirements. The 4.6 requested for FY23 would be sufficient, historic levels, but due to this administration's spending, inflation is soaring at rates we have not seen since 1981. Instead of accounting for these economic realities, the DoD wrongfully budgeted for a 2.2% inflation rate in a time where we must increase defense spending to keep pace with peer adversaries. This administration is effectively proposing to cut the Department of Defense. America must continue to enforce the rules-based order that we led in the enduring global security that we involved in. As we have seen in Ukraine, the world looks to the United States to stand by democratic allies around the world. This comes at a cost, but doing so is in our own national security interest. Republicans in the House and the Senate are united, just as we were in fiscal year 22, to ensure that our warfighters have the tools they need to be ready, modernized, and lethal. It's my hope that the majority follows that fiscal year 2022 conference framework that provided sufficient funding to DoD and that we pass our bills on time this year. Along with my disappointment in the top line funding level, I also have serious concerns about some of the proposals by the administration. First, many of the services are continuing to pursue a divest to invest strategy. In some cases, like the Marine Corps, I think this is appropriate. In others, I fear some proposals are short-sighted and leave glaring capability gaps. We cannot simply hope that the programs will meet the needs of the warfighters. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, non-state actors are continuing to invest in capabilities that threaten our security as well as our allies. I fail to understand how decommissioning 24 Navy ships, divesting hundreds of aircraft, helps us maintain our strategic combat advantage over these threats. Budget prioritization must, of course, occur, but we must be ready for a variety of conflicts to break out in multiple warfighting domains. Though I expect much of the discussion today to be focused on the situation in Ukraine, I do not want us to lose sight on what happened in the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Not only did this decision weaken our strategic footprint in the region, it directly led to the deaths of 13 U.S. service members. I look forward to hearing from you about what our enduring requirements in this region are, along with what capability we should be focused on in FY23 appropriation bills. Again, thank you for being here today. Look forward to taking time to question you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Calvert. The full committee chairwoman, Ms. Delora, will be joining us later, but now it's my pleasure to recognize the former chair of the subcommittee and now the full ranking member of the committee, Ms. Granger.
Thank you, Chairman McCollum. I appreciate that very much. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing before us today. The past several months have highlighted how important it is that Congress prioritizes our national security and adequately funds our military. Russia's unprovoked, illegal, and appalling invasion of Ukraine must continue to be met with strong resistance from the United States and our allies. Adversaries like China and Iran and North Korea must know that America will stand firm with its allies and we have the ability to win any fight. While I commend the Department's swift response to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, I'm disappointed by the Department's fiscal year 2023 budget request. Inflation continues to increase costs for all sectors, and the defense industry is not immune to its effects, despite increased aggression from our adversaries and, once again, the Biden administration is shortchanging defense. I hope we can reach a bipartisan consensus similar to the one that led to the final passage of the fiscal year 2022 appropriation bills. This includes robust defense spending at a rate much higher than requested by the administration. Congress must ensure that our men and women in uniform have the tools and the resources to meet and defeat our enemies. Now is not the time to underfund the military. And to close, I thank each of you for your service. I look forward to hearing from you today, and thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Granger. Gentlemen, your full written testimony will be placed on the record. Members have lots of questions, as you can well imagine, so feel free to give a summarized form of your statements. Secretary Austin, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, Chair McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, Ranking Member Granger, and all the distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the chance to testify today in support of the President's budget request for fiscal year 2023. It's great to be here with General Milley, who's been an outstanding partner. I'm also pleased to be joined by our Comptroller, Undersecretary Mike McCord. Madam Chair, we're still focused on three key priorities at the Department of Defense: defending our nation, taking care of our people, and succeeding through teamwork. And our budget request helps us meet each of those priorities. Our budget request seeks more than $56 billion for air power platforms and systems, and more than $40 billion to maintain our dominance at sea, including buying 9 more Battle Force ships, and almost $13 billion to support and modernize our combat-credible land forces. Our budget request also funds the modernization of all 3 legs of the nuclear triad to ensure that we maintain a safe, secure, and effective strategic deterrent. And of course, none of these capabilities matter much without our people and their families. So we're seeking your support for a 4.6% pay raise for our military and civilian personnel and other special pay and benefits. We also plan to invest in outstanding and affordable childcare, and in the construction of on-base child development centers, and in ensuring that all of our families can always put good and healthy food on the table. We're also deeply focused on the terrible problem of suicide in the U.S. military. So we're increasing access to mental health care, expanding telehealth capacities, and fighting the tired old stigmas against seeking help. And with your support, I've just ordered the establishment of an independent review committee to help us grapple with suicide, to better understand it, to prevent it, and treat the unseen wounds that lead to it. At the same time, we're still working hard to implement the recommendations of the Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault. We know that we have a long way to go to rid ourselves of this scourge, and our budget request seeks nearly $480 million to do just that. This is a leadership issue, and you have my personal commitment to keep leading. You're also seeing how much our leadership matters when it comes to Ukraine. And last month, I convened the first meeting of what's now the Contact Group on Ukrainian Security. It's a group of defense leaders from around the world committed to supporting Ukraine after Russia's unprovoked and unjust invasion. And it's an important new way for nations of goodwill to intensify their efforts to help Ukraine better defend itself, both for today's urgent needs and for the long haul. Now, with the help of Congress, the United States has been able to deliver security assistance to Ukraine with unprecedented speed and resolve. And that's made a huge difference on the ground. And President Zelensky made that clear when I met with him last month in Kyiv, along with Secretary of State Blinken. Since January 2021, the United States has committed approximately $4.5 billion in security assistance to Ukraine, which includes the $150 million authorized by the President last Friday. Our most urgent goal continues to be sending the Ukrainians the capabilities they need most right now, as a war has shifted to the Donbass and to the south. The coming weeks will be critical for Ukraine. Next week, we expect to exhaust the drawdown authority that Congress approved in March. So as you know, the President submitted a supplemental budget request to Congress so that we can continue to meet Ukraine's urgent requirements without interruption. And I deeply appreciate the House's vote yesterday to approve that request with bipartisan support. And I hope that the Senate quickly follows. The supplemental will provide funds for additional drawdown authority. It will also provide more resources for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative for critical investments and for covering the operational costs of bolstering NATO's eastern flank. I want to thank all of you for your strong leadership toward our shared goal of helping Ukraine defend itself and support NATO. Supporting NATO. Now, let me briefly mention a few other major efforts that the department's focused on. As you know, the department's pacing challenge remains countering aggression from China. So this budget invests some $6 billion in the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. And in keeping with our new national defense strategy, we're going to enhance our force posture, our infrastructure, our presence, and our readiness in the Indo-Pacific, including the missile defense of Guam. At the same time, we must be prepared for threats that pay no heed to borders, from pandemics to climate change. And we must tackle the persistent threats posed by North Korea, Iran, and global terrorist groups. So I'm proud that our budget seeks more than $130 billion for research, development, testing, and evaluation. And that's the largest R&D request that this department has ever made. This includes $1 billion for artificial intelligence, $250 million for 5G, nearly $28 billion for space capabilities, and another $11 billion to protect our networks and develop a cyber mission force. Madam Chair, this budget maintains our edge, but it does not take that edge for granted. So I ask this committee to support the President's budget, and with the help of Congress, we will continue to defend this nation, take care of our people, and support our allies and partners. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. General Milley, the floor is yours.
Chair McCollum and Ranking Member Calvert and Ranking Member Granger, I'm indeed privileged to be here alongside the Secretary of Defense and Secretary McCord to represent the soldiers, the sailors, the airmen, Marines, Guardians, the United States Joint Force. Our troops are the best led, best equipped, best trained, most lethal, and most capable military force in the world, largely due to your continued support. Alongside our allies and partners, at any given time, approximately 400,000 of us are currently standing watch in 155 countries and conducting operations every day that keep Americans safe. Currently, we are supporting our European allies and guarding NATO's eastern flank in the face of the unnecessary war of aggression by Russia against the people of Ukraine and the assault on the democratic institutions and the rules-based international order that have prevented great power war for the last 78 years since the end of World War II. We are now facing two global powers, China and Russia, each with significant military capabilities, both who intend to fundamentally change the current rules-based order. We are entering a world that is becoming more unstable, and the potential for significant international conflict between great powers is increasing, not decreasing. The United States military comprises one of the four key components of national power: diplomatic, economic, informational, and military, in order to protect the homeland and sustain a stable and open international system. In coordination with the other elements of power, we constantly develop a wide range of military options for the President as Commander-in-Chief and for this Congress to consider. As the United States military, we are prepared to deter and, if necessary, to fight and win against anyone who seeks to attack the United States, our allies, or our significant and vital national security interests. The Joint Force appreciates the work that our elected representatives do to ensure that we have the resources needed to train, equip, and manage the force in order to be ready. We thank the Congress for increasing last fiscal year's level of military funding, and we look forward to your support for this year's budget. The Joint Force will deliver modernization and readiness for our armed forces and security to the people of the United States at the FY23 budget request of $773 billion. This budget will enable the decisions, the modernization, and the transformation of the Joint Force in order to set and meet the conditions of the operating environment that we are likely to see in 2030 and beyond, the so-called change in the character of war that we have discussed many times in the past. We will work diligently to ensure the resources the American people entrust to us are spent prudently in the best interests of the nation. In alignment with the National Defense Strategy and the forthcoming National Military Strategy, this budget delivers a ready, agile, and capable joint force that will defend the nation while taking care of our people and working with our partners and allies. We are currently witness to the greatest threat to the peace and security of Europe and perhaps the world in my 42, almost 43 years of service in uniform. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is threatening to undermine not only European peace and stability, but global peace and stability, the one that my parents and generations of Americans fought so hard to defend. The islands of the Pacific and the beaches of Normandy bore witness to the incredible tragedy that befalls humanity when nations seek power through military aggression across sovereign borders. Despite this horrific assault on the institutions of freedom, it is heartening to see the world rally and say never again to the specter of war in Europe. Your military stands ready to do whatever is directed in order to maintain the peace and stability not only on the European continent, but a peace that ensures global stability and international order where all nations can prosper in peace. We are also prepared and need to sustain our capabilities anywhere else on the globe, as well as our priority effort in the Asia-Pacific region, measured against our pacing challenge of the People's Republic of China. And in defense of our nation, we must maintain competitive overmatch in all the domains of war: space, cyber, land, sea, and air. The United States of America is at a very critical and historic geostrategic inflection point. We need to pursue a clear-eyed strategy of maintaining the peace through the unambiguous capability of strength relative to China and Russia. This requires that we simultaneously maintain current readiness and modernize for the future. If we do not do that, then we are risking the security of future generations. And I believe this budget is a major step in the right direction. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions and succinct answers. I want to be a good steward of time for my my colleagues here up at the podium. Yesterday, President Biden referred to combating inflation as his top domestic policy. Would you please share with the committee the FY23 budget request and how it was built and the amount of program and cost growth, and then how you worked inflation into that. So, Secretary Austin, if you'd start out with that, and if you want to turn it over to Mr. McCord at any point, please do so.
Well, thank you, Chair McCollum, and I will provide some comments, and I certainly will invite Secretary McCollum to, Secretary McCord, excuse me, to make some comments as well. We built this budget based upon our national defense strategy, which we just released, as you know, in classified form. We were very diligent, careful to make sure that we went after the capabilities that we needed to support that strategy. And I'm confident that we were successful in doing that. And this budget provides us significant capability. And again, as we match those capabilities to what's needed to be relevant in the work that we're pursuing in the Indo-Pacific and also in Europe, I think that again, this is a very healthy budget and provides a significant capability. When we built the budget, we had to snap the chalk line at some point in time, as you always do when you build a budget. And at that point in time, we made some key assumptions, and I'll let Secretary McCord speak to that.
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Yes, as the Secretary said, the first line of effort, of course, was building the budget to support the strategy and implement the strategy. But parallel to that, I was conducting a review, my team was, on what inflation was doing in calendar year 21, which was the period we were building the budget. So we came in with an assumption that the GDP inflation that we used would be about 2. We saw that was increasing. We doubled it basically to 3.9% for 22 as we built that price increase into 23 and going forward. If you look at the last 6 months of data, which we did not have then but have now, that number is now 5.3. So we are a little under, but we, as the Secretary said, we did the best we could with the information we had. We recognize that things have changed a little since then. And as I described in my rollout briefing when the budget came out, we put about $14 billion a year of additional pricing increase into each year of our 5-year plan for goods and services, another $6 billion for higher compensation. So about $20 billion per year from last year's plan to this year's plan just for the pricing increase on top of the strategy-driven specific program choices.
So, thank you for that. So inflation, as I said, the president is focused on combating it, and I know you will work diligently with both sides of the aisle as well as our staff as we move forward if we have any inflation issues that need to be addressed. But thank you for that answer. The run-up to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Biden administration engaged in an unprecedented campaign to declassify intelligence, one I fully supported, knowing what I was being briefed on and what I thought the American public and the world should know. Could you maybe expand for this committee how important the role of intelligence diplomacy has been in Ukraine and working with our European allies as the Russians prepared its unnecessary aggression against the people of Ukraine? And are there any areas in the defense intelligence enterprise that you would recommend for additional investments or for this committee to focus on?
Well, thank you, Chair McCollum. You make a great point. What we did in terms of sharing intelligence with our allies and partners was very, very helpful to demonstrate that we wanted to be transparent. And this is a tribute or credit to the president. It was his decision to move forward and make sure that we shared as much information as possible. That created trust amongst our allies in a more meaningful way, and that trust allowed us to create greater unity. And so from the very beginning, you've seen the president, myself, Secretary Blinken work hard to make sure that we united the alliance as much as we could, and we have been united from the very start, and we hope to be that way going forward. But to answer your question, the sharing of intelligence was a key element in getting us to where we are right now.
And then my last question, and I know I'll probably get a brief answer because we're going to be talking to your staffs as we move forward, but there's a lot of focus on the Indo-Pacific, and rightly so. But the Arctic also, with what is happening with climate change, the natural resources that are up there, the shipping, the distance the United States actually is from Russia, the fact that Russia and China at times are working together, and China's considering itself a near Arctic nation, which as a geography teacher I find a little baffling, but they often say things that baffle me. Could you maybe talk about what the department is doing to coordinate activities in the Arctic, here again with a lot of our allies, a lot of our NATO allies, and any resources that you would want us to be focused on that are included in this budget?
We are an Arctic nation. This is a region that's very important to us, and you've seen us address the Arctic in our strategy, our national defense strategy that just came out. You've seen us most recently open up a center that's focused on Arctic issues, and we continue the work of making sure that we have that center properly manned and focused on the right issues. We've conducted a number of significant exercises in the Arctic region here recently. As a matter of fact, there's a substantial exercise ongoing up there right now with air exercise, and that's been, we've been doing that throughout. We'll continue that work. We've recently had 2 combatant commanders visit the Arctic simultaneously, and so I think this is a focus area for us. As you pointed out, this is important, and we'll continue to resource it appropriately.
Thank you for that, and I look forward to being a person from the bold north, as many of us on this committee are, not the gentleman next to me from Florida, however, to work with you on this. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Austin, I think we're all in agreement regarding the threats facing our nation. China is using all the instruments of national power to erode America's standing in the world. We received your new national defense strategy and your FY 2023 budget request. I'd like to know a few things. First, how does this budget align with your new strategy? And second, how does this budget specifically deter China and Russia? For example, with no clear shipbuilding plan, and only 8 ships, as I read the budget, requested in the budget, coupled with the retirement of 24 ships, I have a very big concern that we're not taking the threat of China aggression in the South China Sea seriously, especially when China is building 22 ships this year. We're retiring 24 and only building 8. How does this budget ensure that we're balancing the ability to fight tonight with the much-needed modernization across the armed forces?
Well, thank you, sir. Again, when we built this budget, we built it based upon our new national defense strategy. And there is significant investment in a number of issues, a number of capabilities that are absolutely relevant to the competition with China. As you know, we have to be relevant in all domains, all warfighting domains, air, land, sea, space, and cyber. And in this budget, you see us invest $27 billion in space, and another $11 billion in cyberspace, $24 billion in missile defense and defeat, $7 billion in long-range fires, $4 billion of that is invested in hypersonics. And so we're investing in significant capability with this budget. And there's an additional $6.1 billion invested in our Pacific Defense Initiative. So we believe that again, this is going after the right capabilities to ensure that we remain not only competitive, but we maintain that competitive edge that we spoke of earlier.
Well, obviously, from my perspective, and I think from the perspective of many of us on this side, is that obviously all the things that you talked about we're supportive of, but at the same time, numbers do matter. And right now, as you know, the Chinese have, about 360 ships to our 280 ships, and they're building significantly, almost 3-to-1 to our capability. So that's a big concern. One other quick question on the issue of civilian personnel, and I know I bring this up to you and others often. I have a historic trend sheet here that I would like to submit to the record. In the year 2000, there were 651,000 DOD civilians and 1,384,000 active duty military. Today, there's 100,000 more civilians, 752,000, actually 753,000 civilian employees to 1,350,000 active duty. So we've dropped active duty by 50,000 and increased civilians by 100,000, and the ratio obviously is out of sync to the historic average. And I think I've mentioned to you, if we went to the Business Council recommendation to bring that back to the historic ratio, we would save $125 billion over 5 years, which we could keep in the department and spend on procurement of building the ships that we need and building the new airframes that we need and assisting the Army and all the rest of the service on the capabilities that they desperately need. So again, I would take a look at the reforms that are necessary to bring this back into some historic ratio where we spend the money where it needs to be spent. And Madam Chair, I'd like to submit this chair for the record.
Without objection.
Anything you would like to address on that, Mr. Secretary?
Well, thanks, sir. As I've mentioned to you before when we talked about this, maintaining the right balance, as you pointed out, is a key objective of mine. And we'll stay sighted on this and make sure that we do in fact have the right balance. We've taken on a number of new initiatives. We're doing things in space and cyberspace and other areas that require additional staffing. But to your point, we have to make sure that we keep our staffs lean and that we have what we need and not more than we need. So I'm committed to you to continue to work this.
Ms. DeLauro, or I should say full committee chair
That's
DeLauro.
fine. Mr. Laura's fine. You could even call me Rosa. Anyway, thank you very, very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, when we wrote the second supplemental, one area that we focused on was our ability to track weapons that we are sending to Ukraine. The bill requires you, along with Secretary Blinken, to report to the Congress on measures taken to account for the defense articles sent to Ukraine, particularly those that require enhanced end-use monitoring. Look forward to your report. Is there anything you can share with us today about actions you are taking with having more of a diplomatic presence in Ukraine, even if it were less than before the Russian invasion help? How is the Department of Defense ensuring that equipment is reaching the right Ukrainian units and used for their intended purposes? The 2022 omnibus provided an additional $300 million for U.S. allies and partners in Europe, including $180 million for the Baltic Security Initiative, $30 million for Poland, $30 million for Romania, $20 million for Bulgaria, and $40 million for Georgia. How will the department use these resources to shore up their defenses?
Thanks, Chair DeLauro. Accountability is an important issue to all of us. As you know, we don't have people on the ground right now, so it makes it a bit difficult. But this is an issue that when I met with President Zelensky and Minister of Defense Reznikov in Kyiv about 2 weeks ago, I emphasized the importance of accountability. And his Chief of Defense was also in that meeting, and how important it is to make sure that they are tracking the disposition of our sensitive equipment that's being deployed, and they assured me that they were focused on this. And I revisited this again with Minister of Defense a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and when I met with him in Germany, and then as late as yesterday. And in terms of the disposition, the actual disposition of the equipment, whether or not it's getting to where the people that need it. This is something that the chairman and I check every time that we talk to our counterparts, and we talk to them weekly. And again, I revisited this issue with Minister Reznikov yesterday, and again, we'll continue to to emphasize this very, very important point.
And I'm presuming that we are working with these other countries in essence to bolster their resources as well in terms of what they need. Bulgaria, Romania, Poland.
We continue that work. You're right, Chair.
Thank you. If I can, I just have
Please.
a quick question. You know, there's a great focus on the total amount of funding for the Department of Defense. I'd like to focus on two other aspects: consistent and timely funding. From 21 to 22, for programs within the subcommittee's jurisdiction, the department received a 4.7% increase. The budget request proposes a nearly identical increase for 2022 to 2023. We have already started the process of having full committee counterparts meet to attempt to come to an agreement on overall spending, which would greatly facilitate the enactment of the 2023 bills. How important are predictability, the steady increases in funding? How helpful would it be for the department for Congress to enact spending bills before October 1st? And can you describe the negative consequences of another CR?
Well, first of all, Chair DeLauro, let me thank you for your continued focus on this issue. You've done a lot of work to help the department in the past, and I appreciate what I anticipate that you'll continue to do in the future. Thanks for everything. This is really important, and if I could ask for, anything, it's for, both sides to lean into this and get the budget passed as quickly as possible. And I know it's important to everybody, but as you know, without a budget, we can't do new starts. And some of the things that we want to invest in, which will give us that capability that helps us maintain that competitive edge. We're late in some cases getting started. So getting a budget by September would be great. And again, if I could ask for everyone's help on that again, that's one of the most important things that you could do to help us, aside from passing the budget itself.
Thank you very, very much, and thank you for your help the last time. I just might conclude by saying that through the supplementals, both in March and the one we passed last night, we're talking about close to $30 billion for defense. So I think we are keeping our commitment in that effort as we move forward, and so that what we're looking at in terms of the increased percentage in the president's budget, et cetera, should be in line with where we can try to move forward. But thank you very, very much, all of you, for your service and for all of your efforts to keeping our national security secure. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for working it in. I know how busy everybody
I'm
is.
going to dash next door. So thank you.
Next, for questions, we will hear from the full ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Granger.
Thank you. The military services want to retire equipment well before the end of their useful lives. The capabilities lost by retiring these assets will not be replaced until future systems come online. One example of this is the Navy's Littoral Combat Ship. General Milley, please explain how the department determines what amount of risk is acceptable when considering these types of retirements.
The way we evaluate risk is risk to the mission. Primarily, we take inputs from the combatant commanders for that. And secondly, evaluate risk to force. And for that, we're looking at train, man, equip, which is primarily the roles of the service chiefs. Together, those come in to me, and I compile that for the Secretary and provide him a risk assessment. With respect to the Littoral Combat Ship Navy program, Navy Marine program, there's an ongoing study for amphibious warfare and in the Navy for the shipbuilding, as was mentioned by Ranking Member Calvert about shipbuilding. And we base a lot of our analysis on those inputs from the Navy and the Marine Corps.
So if you don't have a replacement for it and you're still considering it, then why would you mothball them, as we call it, at this time?
Well, it comes down to balance in terms of what's affordable and what the Navy can afford and what the Department of Defense can afford. So there's risk calculations on what not to fund and what to fund.
and the overall assessment was to go ahead and fund the 8 ships that we're buying and not to continue to fund the LCS for this particular budget.
I have serious concerns about the way that was determined. I have another question. Secretary Austin, the conflict in Ukraine has placed a high demand on our supply of javelins, Stingers, and other U.S. munitions. This demand has highlighted a capacity issue for defense industry. How can we best support a robust and flexible capacity for our defense industry, and how can we ensure that we have stockpiles sufficient to meet demand for critical items needed in Ukraine and for future conflicts?
The stockpiles are something that the chairman and I monitor routinely. Certainly, we have the input from each of the services. In terms of working with industry to get them to open up lines and increase production, as you know, we met with industry early on. They've committed to doing that. You saw the president was just down at one of the javelin, one of the places where we're producing javelins here just recently, and got a thorough lay down. So the defense industry is leaning into this. It'll take a little bit of time to get some of these opened up to the degree that we want them opened up, but that work is ongoing. And I have to admit that the industry is meeting us more than halfway on this issue.
Thank you.
Next, excuse me, next we'll go to Mr. Ruppersberger, Mr. Womack, Mr. Aguilar, and then Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Ruppersberger, you're
Thank you.
recognized.
The first thing I want to acknowledge, Mr. Secretary and General, your competence, your leadership throughout the years that I've been here. I've been working mostly national security, and I think you both are excellent leaders, and you're in very difficult times, and I think you know how to build the right team to move forward and what your mission is. So thank you for your service. I'm going to get into more a specific area, Ukraine's cybersecurity posture. Over the last few weeks, we have publicly learned more and more about how our nation's cyberspace operations have both aided allies and partners like Ukraine, and our own understanding of our adversaries' capabilities and techniques in cyberspace. Now, how important is persistent engagement with malign actors in cyberspace, and how do you assess U.S. Cyber Command's capacity to build more partnerships like we have with European nations and other parts of the world?
In terms of the importance, it is absolutely critical, and that's why early on we partnered with Ukrainians and helped them with training and helped them to outline issues and associated with their networks. That's paying dividends for them as we speak. It also allows us to get early warning if we see something developing that could be a threat to our allies or us. And so that's been very helpful to us. In this budget, sir, you've seen that we've invested some over $11 billion in cyber. That helps us to modernize the force, but it also helps to increase the size of the force. And that will help in our efforts to partner with additional nations, not only in Europe, but most importantly in the Indo-Pacific as well. So to answer your question, it's critical. We are building more capacity to be able to do that as we speak.
Another question, how much flexibility do you have in your posture based on the department's fiscal year 2023 budget to account for possible increased risk to national security systems and defense critical infrastructure here in the United States, given the White House's public acknowledgement of evolving intelligence that the Russians are exploring options for cyber attacks?
Again, I think we have significant capacity. We need more capacity, and we're investing in that. In terms of threats to the homeland, as you know, sir, DHS is the lead agency for that, but we are doing everything within our power to be ready to assist DHS with anything that they need help with. And so that coordination is ongoing. We've leaned forward on this quite a bit, and I think it's been very helpful. So we'll continue those efforts.
Well, and I know NSA does a lot in this regard. Chris English, who was deputy director, very qualified and competent, is really heading up the domestic side now. And I assume that you all come together as a team to share information to protect us.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's routine coordination. That and you know General Nakasone, he is absolutely focused on being ahead of the need, and so there's a great relationship there.
Yeah, and that is a really good team, in my opinion. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Womack.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service to our country. I want to follow up on a question that my colleague, Mr. Calvert, had asked about the Indo-Pacific strategy. The budget request seems to have small increases in force rotations, but no new real permanent increases in combat-capable military forces in the region. Instead, seems to be betting on more innovation and soft power in that strategy. In my opinion, the need for military power has not decreased, but we're choosing to try to plug in some gaps with maybe some non-military capabilities. So please, Mr. Secretary, help me understand where I'm wrong on this and where this department is trying to go in meeting that very complicated strategy.
And I don't think there's a right or wrong here, sir. I think what I would like to say is, number one, I think we have a very sound strategy, and you've just seen us roll out that new national defense strategy. It focuses on making sure that we employ capability in all 5 of the warfighting domains: air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace. And it also focuses on making sure that we leverage the capability resident in our allies and partners. And I think that's really important. And as we continue that work, I think we're seeing some great opportunities. But as we look at our strategy, making sure that we are in fact getting the capabilities of space and cyberspace integrated into our efforts, I think it's really, really key. Again, with the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, we have invested significantly in making sure that we increase our training rotations in the theater, that we're investing in some infrastructure and doing some other things. So I think it's a sound strategy. I think what we've asked for enables us to accomplish that strategy.
Has the unanticipated extraordinary cost to deal with what was going on in Eastern Europe right now, has that cost impacted what we're needing or what we're trying to do in this budget for our biggest pacing threat, which is China?
I would say no. I think that, as we've taken on our efforts to help the Ukrainians, we certainly have invested quite a bit. As you heard me say earlier, sir, $4.5 billion over the last couple of years. But we've also seen investment from our allies and partners. Our major efforts here are, with NATO and with the allies and partners that are in the region, who are also investing in providing equipment and training to the Ukrainians as well. And it's that combination of effort that I think has been very, very meaningful. So to answer your question, we've maintained our pace, our efforts in the Indo-Pacific, all the while we were engaged in our current efforts in Ukraine.
Got a question for General Milley. President's budget requests a cut in strength in the active Army by 12,000 soldiers. I want us to be very careful as a country not to allow the Army to be a bill payer in a lot of areas. It also cut the strength for both active Air Force and Navy, but I'd like to specifically focus on the cuts to the Army. And that the Army's requested reduction is based on the reassessment of recruitment potential and obtainable goals. Can you speak to the pipeline and the impact it's having on our ability to meet our objectives on the recruiting and retention front?
I can. The overall recruiting has actually gone well for the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps. They're meeting their goals, and Space Force, they're meeting their goals. Army's a little bit behind glide path. Now, high schools haven't graduated yet. They're coming up. So those numbers are leaving out a little bit here in the coming months. But we project that the Army will come up a point or two below what their desired recruiting goals are. Relative to the end strength, what Secretary Wormuth and Chief of Staff McConville are focused on is quality of the force. So they want to make sure that they're bringing in the high-quality individuals into the military. So they determined, in order to do that, they wanted to cut end strength just a little bit. So it's a modest cut. I don't think it'll have a significant negative impact on the overall national security of the United States. Take, for example, what you mentioned about in the Pacific. We've got 350,000+ troops arrayed in the Pacific from the West Coast all the way forward stationed west of the MDL. We've got a very, very large and capable naval force with the PAC fleet. You've got a corps and a couple of divisions, and you've got a tremendous amount of fourth and fifth generation aircraft along with cyber and space capabilities. So relative to the pacing threat, the main effort, if you will, the strategic main effort for the United States military, that is clearly in the Pacific. So even though we are incurring additional capabilities and investments in what we're doing with Ukraine, it's not having a significant negative effect on our ability to keep pace with China. And I think the cuts for the Army, for example, are quite modest relative to the whole.
Thank you, General.